Welcome to this week's session of Fridays on the Farm. This week we're going to talk about culling cattle. As we start culling cattle, it's important that we understand what our herd goals are. Number one is she profitable? Is she producing a quality calf every year that we can sell and she's worth her investment to be here? Is she breeding back quickly so that we know that she is a strong producer? We want to make sure there aren't any obvious signs she's not fitting in, whether she's losing weight, she can't maintain her body condition score, she's breeding back when she's supposed to, she doesn't have any other major health issues, she doesn't carry any traits that we don't want passed along to the next generation of the herd. We want to make sure that she's a good mama cow that's raising that calf, she's taking care of it, she's producing enough milk, so that that calf that she's raising is making it economical for her to stay here. So at the end of the day, we want to know that she's a profitable option to stay in the herd and she's not just costing us money every year.
In order to make the decisions on who to keep and who to cull, it's important that we have solid records to look at. As you start to plan your record keeping process, the first thing is decide what information is important to you. Are you more concerned with production information or financial information or both? Which aspects are important to your herd? Then it's important that we slow down and we take the time to collect it. Those record keeping books don't have to be the fanciest thing in the world. This is a handy book we have here at the office. You're welcome to come pick a copy of it up. But you can do it as fancy as you want to. Some people really like apps on their phone that track every little thing. Find something that works for you that you're willing to take the time to use. And that gets us to point number 3, is you have to be willing to use that information. Some of the things that we suggest that you collect are things like your cow ID number. It's important we know who she is so we can track what she's doing. We ID that calf so we can keep track of him and how he performs. We know what bull she was bred to. If we can keep an idea of when that calf was born, the calving needs, those are all other great things to have if you want to take down that much information. But it's just as important that we take the time to use the information that we take the time to collect.
In order to keep records on these cows, you've got to be able to identify who they are. And there's lots of different ways that people can do. One of the easiest things you can do is ear tags. Make sure these are ear tags that are easy to read. Sometimes your cattle don't always let you get as close as you need to, so that way if you see her across the field, she may not let you come right up to her, you still know who she is, maybe what her calf she had. And when that calf is born, we want to ID it too as soon as we can. That way, as we're keeping records, we know who's who and who belongs to who so that we can track both of their performance. Some people are worried that they're going to lose ear tags. Sometimes things do happen. We've all seen cows that have a split ear because they ripped one out. So there are other more permanent options such as branding or tattooing that might be right for your operation.
Reproduction efficiency is probably the most important factor in deciding whether or not to cull these cows. If she's open and she's not producing calves, all she's doing is costing you money. You're paying to feed her, even if that just means she's out on pasture, she's taking forage from somebody else who is producing. You're having to put hay out in the winter. If you are supplemental feeding, all she's doing is accumulating cost if she's not producing a calf. Not only should she be producing a calf every year, but make sure she's within your calving window. We work hard to keep our cows all calving at the same time. If she doesn't breed back till 30 days later than everybody else, she's going to have a calf 30 days later than everybody else. When you go to sell that group of calves, you're going to have one runt that doesn't fit in with everybody else, and that's not going to help your herd goals. If she's at the bottom of your herd, she should be at the top of your list to be culled. One of the things we can do to ensure that our calves are all in the same period, everybody's breeding back like they should, rather than just waiting till calves hit the ground, is take the time to pregnancy check your herd. This can be an extremely cost-effective way to get those cows out that aren't producing early on so that you're not spending all winter feeding a cow that's not going to have calf in the spring. Your 3 main options for pregnancy checking, the first one's palpation. There's lots of vets in our area that are willing to come out and do this for you. There's ultrasounds. We have some ultrasound folks in our area as well. And blood draw is something they can do or even you can do at home. Some people are even comfortable doing things like palpation on their own. Whichever method you decide, make sure it's something that you are doing so that you know what your herd is producing rather than feeding through a whole season just to not get a calf on the other end of it. We want to thank Providence Veterinary Care, Dr. Aaron Wilburn, and RCK Genetics, Ricky White, for letting us tag along for the day so that we could show you guys some of these methods of pregnancy testing.
Hi, I'm Dr. Aaron Wilburn from Providence Veterinary Care, and today we're going to be palpating some of these cows to see if they're pregnant or not. We're going to palpate this cow for pregnancy. So what I do is I go in through her rectum, and I can actually feel through her rectal wall, feeling for her reproductive organs, so her uterus and her uterine horns and her ovaries. And what I'm doing is I'm feeling where the position of the uterus is in her body, if there is a calf that I can feel, how big is it. If I can't feel the calf, I'm feeling for other clues. And I should be able to stage where she's at in her pregnancy. And this girl is about 4 months bred. Everything feels great. We've got a live moving calf, and that's that. So we're going to tail bleed this cow. There's a nice vein that runs right down the middle on the underside of the tail. And so what I do is as close to the midline as you can hit, right there in that divot. And attach your vacuum container, and sometimes it's not perfectly on midline. You kind of have to wiggle around. And there I hit the vein, so you can see it filling up with blood. Pull it off of there, and that's it.
Ricky White from Romance, Arkansas with RCK Genetics, and we do bovine embryo transfer and bovine reproductive work, AI cows, ultrasound pregnancies, and do embryo transfer and collect semen, free semen on bulls. Pregnant. 50 days.
At the end of the day, our calves are major money makers from these cows. So it's important that those calves are performing highly as well. Not just is she having one, but is she having a quality calf that's going to be profitable for our operation. Most of the time, that poor calf performance is a result of inferior genetics, which could be her fault or it could be the fault of the bull that you're using. Poor mothering. Is she taking the time to make sure a calf's where it's supposed to be, or is she leaving it out to get got by the local coyote population? Is she producing enough milk and colostrum? Is she feeding this one like she ought to be? If she is a first or second calf heifer, we might give her a little bit more slack than we do everybody else. But even then, we want her to be producing a decent calf, because if she's at the bottom of the group as a first or second calf heifer, like we talked about last week, she'll probably stay in the bottom of the group. This calf is a heifer calf we really liked when she hit the ground. She had really good bone. She's a black baldy, which everybody likes to have black baldies. But the problem was she's a twin, and her mom didn't pick her. That cow's on the top of our cull list when she weans off the sibling to this calf, because we don't want the heritability of the twins. We don't want to have to do this every year. And the mothering quality, where she dumped this one, she kicked it bad enough that she wouldn't let it nurse. That's not a cow we want to keep in our herd. The other factor to keep in mind is what markability traits is she passing on? Does she throw those black baldy calves that everybody at the sale barn wants right now? Or is she throwing horn calves that we don't want to have to take the time to dehorn? That'd be a reason for her to go down the road. Age can be really variable when we talk about these cows and whether or not to keep them or whether to move them down the road. Every cow kind of handles this differently, and this is where, as a producer, you have to know your herd. It really comes down to more of a soundness issue than it does an actual age issue. Does she still have good enough teeth that she can forage, she can eat, she can keep her body condition, and she can produce enough milk for those calves? Once her teeth go, she can't keep the intake up to keep her calf performance going. Feet and legs are the same thing. Do you have a problem with foot rot? I probably wouldn't keep her there. Are her legs sound enough that she can travel and do what she needs to do? Structural problems can be a major issue. For example, a cow with poor hip structure, she's got too much slope from her hooks to her pins, can run the risk of being lame. If she starts to have more joint issues, is she going to be able to have that calf and not have to pull it and cause other problems? Those cows need to be sound enough that they can graze effectively and breed successfully. Cattle lameness not only can hurt their reproductive efficiency, but can also cost you at the sale barn if you do decide to move her. So it's important that we want to cull her before she's at the point that she's lame. The other thing we want to keep an eye on is her udder. Udder soundness definitely affects our milk production, which is going to affect our calf consumption and calf performance. So we want to make sure that her udder is properly attached and it's efficient and it's productive. Weak udder suspension is going to make it harder for those calves to suckle, which is going to cause a decreased consumption, which is going to decrease your calf performance. We want to have a healthy udder that's free of infection, and all 4 quadrants are working well in milk production. There are some studies that show especially Brahman-influenced cattle are pretty consistent till they're about 8 years old. At 10 years old, they start to decline, and at 12 years old, it's an even steeper decline. But every herd is going to be a little bit different, especially depending on your breed, your body condition score, and how well you're managing these cattle. The cow-calf pair in this one, when this picture was taken, this cow was 14 years old and one of the producer's favorite cows. But because she had been a great producer for 14 years, he loved her, she was gentle, she always threw a strong calf, she got to stay a little bit longer than that mark. Fast forward 2 years after this photo was taken, and her last calf she raised, while she did raise a calf and he was a good calf, her body condition score declined really quickly. We knew she was going to have a rough winter. The producer went ahead and decided to move her before he got to that point of having to put her down or her not making another winter. So that's where you as a producer, you know your cattle, you know their strengths and weaknesses, but don't be afraid to cull either. Other factors and health issues that can cause a more immediate cull are things like cancer eye, Johne's disease, and prolapsing. Cancer eye is the most common and the most economically significant tumor that cattle get. Its cause is multifactorial. Some of it's genetic, some of it's sunlight, some of it's nutrition, some of it may be viruses. But at the end of the day, it's an extremely aggressive disease that targets the tissue around the eye. Once the cow's diagnosed with it, we've got to decide if we're going to treat her or we're going to cull her immediately. Most of the time, if she's got a calf big enough to wean or if she's already weaned a calf, culling's going to be your best option. If it's an advanced stage of cancer, it could spread to the other parts of the body or invade other tissues, and sometimes we just have to euthanize those cattle because their carcasses would be condemned anyway. Treatment options really come down to how soon do you catch it. If it's early on, sometimes those can be surgically removed. Sometimes eye removal is an option, but it's got to happen early on. It's also important to realize that these cattle that have cancer eye are unsuitable for food production and should normally be euthanized rather than attempting to take them to market. Johne's disease is another health issue that we don't always hear about in our part of the world. Cattle suspected of being infected with Johne's should be marketed for food as soon as possible to get them out of the herd. This disease is caused by a bacteria that can survive in the environment for periods longer than a year. Johne's disease causes lots of issues such as severe diarrhea, weight loss in adult cattle, which can lead to enormous production losses for the herd. Unfortunately, there's not an effective treatment or a cure for Johne's disease, so it's important that if you think this is an issue, we cull those cattle pretty quick. Prolapse is another issue that can happen within your cows. This is where the vagina or the uterus start to protrude through the vulva and is exposed to the outside environment. This can cause lots of issues for injury. It can cause lots of issues for infection. Normally, this is going to be late in gestation or at calving. Vaginal prolapses can be corrected, but the chances that they are going to reoccur are high. Because we also know this is a genetic condition, we know there's a chance she's going to pass it on to those heifer calves. We want to move her out of the herd. Uterine prolapses occur at or shortly after calving and can be life-threatening if the uterine artery is damaged. These prolapses occur when the uterus is pulled through the birth canal with the calf or the afterbirth. Veterinarians can properly repair them, and sometimes they may never do it again. But the sooner we catch it and the sooner we can treat it, the better outcome we can expect. If a full recovery is expected, your cow's still young enough, you may want to consider keeping her. However, if that uterus seems like it's compromised in any way, she should be culled just because of the chances of her reproductive performance declining.
When it comes to the disposition of your cattle, you have to make the right choice of what's right for your operation. You know what you're willing to put up with and what you aren't. But at the end of the day, it's important to remember not to get hurt. Sometimes cattle that are too excitable can put us in dangerous situations. When we put them in working pens, they're more likely to cause problems and get somebody hurt. But if you like more excitable cattle, that's fine. Do what works for your operation. There are such things as cattle that are too gentle. We've been at lots of places where you can't hardly push one through the chute because they're not worried about anything. Maybe somewhere in the middle is right for you. But it's also important to remember that those overly excitable cows are going to have overly excitable calves that we're going to have to deal with on that side of the coin. Those calves often are higher stress. Those higher stress levels can lead to what we call dark cutters, which are meat that's heavily discounted. So lots of times our feedlot don't want those more excitable calves. Sometimes those more excitable cows, when you try to work them, you're getting everybody up and there's one high-headed cow that takes off and runs to the fence. She may take 10 of your other cows with her that weren't nearly as bad. So that one bad attitude might hurt the rest of your herd. If you'll cull out some of those more problem cows, it can make big differences across the board for the rest of your cattle. Depending on your operation, there are different times you may want to cull cattle, and you've got to do what works for you. If they're having a major health issue, like if they have cancer eye or they're hurt or something like that, you may want to get them out of the herd as immediately as possible. If their body condition score is too low and you're worried that they won't be able to raise a calf next year, maybe you want to keep them a little bit longer, get them in better condition, so they might be worth a little bit more. If they're in decent shape, but maybe they're not your favorite cow and they've got an okay calf this year, she gets to stay until she's done weaning that calf. Or maybe you sell them as a pair. Some of that comes down to the market conditions. Sometimes the killer cow market isn't where it needs to be. And if we could hang on to them for another month, put a little bit more flesh on them, maybe it's worth it to hang on to them a little bit longer. If that calf sells better as a pair than what wean calves are bringing, maybe you go ahead and move her. That's where watching the market, knowing your operation, and knowing where you need to be is so important. Another factor to consider is your current farm production. This time of year, everybody's starting to feed hay. Folks are starting to do their final counts on how much they have. Maybe you're feeding earlier this year and you may not have quite enough. If you're not going to have enough hay, maybe you do need to cull a little bit earlier. Take those production factors into consideration when you're trying to decide whether or not to cull and how soon you're going to have to. The final thing to consider if you're trying to decide whether it's the right time to cull is what's it going to cost to replace that cow. There are some factors that it's an immediate cull and she's automatically off the list. Maybe she's a little high-headed, she's not bad enough to hurt you, but you really don't like her. But she does throw a decent calf every year, and this year replacement heifers are really high. Maybe it's worth it for her to have an extra year in the pasture and wait till the market's a little bit better and you can replace her at a better cost for you. Those are all decisions you have to weigh and decide what works for you in your operation. And if you need help trying to navigate the market, trying to make those decisions, don't ever hesitate to give us a call at the office. We'd love to help. At the end of the day, by culling our cattle correctly and making those wise management choices, we can greatly improve the profitability of our herd. And to make those decisions, record keeping is so important. Track these cattle, track what they're doing, know what your goals are and what you're trying to achieve so that you can make those decisions. You also know what does and doesn't work for your herd. Maybe there's a cow that's on my list to cull for whatever reason, but you're okay with that and it's not as high of a priority for you, so she gets to stay. You may have something on your list that I would be okay with at my place. Know your herd, know your goals, and know what works for you at the end of the day. But don't be afraid to cull somebody who doesn't fit in your operation.
For more information on culling cattle, we have a fact sheet called Culling the Beef Herd that can be found on our website. And there's also our Beef Cattle Production MP manual that I'm happy to get you copies of if you ever need them. And as always, if you've got questions or you want to walk through your herd and see what you've got and talk through a few things, don't ever be afraid to give us a call at the office.
Thank you for joining us for this week's session of Fridays on the Farm. Next week, we're going to start our final series, which is goal setting and herd planning for next year. See you next Friday.